In the critique, it was always my greatest care to endeavor not only carefully to distinguish the several species of cognition, but to derive concepts belonging to each one of them from their common source. I did this in order that by knowing whence they originated, I might determine their use with safety, and also have the unanticipated but invaluable advantage of knowing the completeness of my enumeration, classification, and specification of concepts a priori, and therefore according to principles. Without this, metaphysics is mere rhapsody, in which no one knows whether he has enough, or whether and where something is still wanting. We can indeed have this advantage only in pure philosophy, but of this philosophy it constitutes the very essence. Immanuel Kant. With this, I'm now getting to a core of Kant's critique of pure reason, or even a core of Kant's whole philosophy. And that is the table of categories, or rather, first off, the table of judgments on which the table of categories is based. And this is probably going to be the most detailed, the most thorough explanation that can be found online on the judgments and the categories that Kant derives from them. At least I have not found anything as extensive. If you know of anything online, you can point it to me. I'd be interested in finding it. But usually you have you have lots of videos here on YouTube that, of course, talk about Kant's theoretical philosophy, about Kant's epistemology, and they will, of course, also mention the table of categories, but they will probably not explain it step by step. They will probably not explain each category, and they will probably not really explain what the whole thing means to Kant. But this is immensely important. It really is the core of Kant's whole system. It's the beating heart of that system. Not just his epistemology, like the categories, they are very important to thinking and to the process of experience, according to Kant. But even beyond his theoretical philosophy, you will always find these categories again. I mentioned that in my lecture on Kant's architectonic method. I mentioned that this table of categories is the key to his architectonic, and in all the parts of his philosophy, at least the writings of his critical period, so his three main works, the three critiques, but also smaller works, smaller essays, again and again you will find his thinking is based on the 12 categories that he describes in the Critique of Pure Reason, but he doesn't always outright say so. You have to find that for yourself, and that's why if you want to understand Kant's philosophy systematically, you absolutely need to understand the categories. If you really want to understand Kant thoroughly, you must be able, if I wake you at 5 in the morning, to tell me all 12 categories, and not just tell me their names. You must really understand them. I really can't stress enough how important they are to Kant's system. This will hopefully become more clear, the why and the how, with time, and I will talk about that more when I explained the individual categories. But before I want to talk about them as a whole and about their meaning and importance, I want to talk about each of these categories and first describe and explain them to you, what they mean. And Well, here I want to first start with the table of judgments, because um, I talked in 2 lectures ago, I talked about how to Kant the intellect is the faculty of concepts. And through concepts, we come to understand things. Through concepts, through general representations, we think. And through them, we also understand, we make sense of things. Without concepts, um, our viewing would be blind, as Kant says. We wouldn't know what it is we are perceiving. Only through concepts can we connect our perceptions and make sense of them, and thereby turn them into experience. And now, in the last lecture, I talked about how the intellect gets to its concepts. And I mentioned that besides the vast number of empirical concepts, there are also some pure intellectual concepts. And those, I said, those are based on the actions of the intellect. The intellect is always connecting, and once it reflects on this connecting action it does, it can turn these actions, by reflecting on them, into 12 pure intellectual concepts, and those are the categories. And so that means that in order to best understand the categories, it is best to first start with the actions um, from where they come. It is those actions, those judgments, whose reflection allows the intellect to come up with these categories later on. That is why I am first talking about the table of judgments. Because Kant says that judging, making judgments, that is what thinking is about. That is the action of our intellect. And what a judgment is, that is any statement really about truth or falsehood. What a judgment is a connection between various representations, or rather a unity of representations. Like when I make the judgment that Kant is a philosopher, then I'm saying there's a unity between the representation or the concept of Kant and the representation or concept of a philosopher. Or when I say that human beings are mortal, I'm saying there's a unity between these two representations of the human and of mortality. So all judgments bring unity into our representations, and thereby they help us understanding and becoming clear about our representations, no matter whether they are analytic or synthetic judgments. They help us make sense of our representations through creating or pointing out a sort of unity between them, or between the objects being represented in them. And now, what Kant is saying is that there are exactly 12 ways, 12 unities, so to say, 12 ways in which we can do this. So there are 12 functions of judgment. And these can be ordered in a table of the judgments. They are purely formal, so it's not about the content of the judgments, it's just about their form. They have 12 different forms. And in this table of judgment, these 12 functions of judgment, they are ordered into 4 or under 4 titles. That is, there are 3 judgments of quantity, 3 judgments of quality, 3 judgments of relation, and 3 judgments of modality. And those in turn belong to 2 classes. So the 6 judgments of quantity and quality belong to the mathematical class, and the 6 judgments of relation and modality belong to the dynamic class. So those classes, they will become more important later on, like when we talk about the categories that are derived from those judgments. Kant doesn't talk about them immediately when talking about the judgments, but I want to mention them right away. Now, what does all of that mean? I want to explain that step by step. First off, the classes. Well, you could say the mathematical judgments, they are more about the basic elements of judgments. I already mentioned in previous lectures that a judgment for its basic elements has a subject about which you make a judgment, like for example Kant, and it has a predicate that is judged to belong to that subject, like philosopher. And then you have the copula, that is the connecting is, which binds them together. Kant is a philosopher. And the mathematical judgments, they are concerned with these basic elements, either with the subject or with the predicate of the judgment. On the other hand, the dynamic judgments, they are more concerned with the relation of the judgment as a whole, either to other judgments or to the judging subject. Now, let's start with the mathematical judgments that once again are concerned with the basic elements of the judgment. And here you have the judgments of quantity and of quality. The quantity is about the subject of the judgment. So it is about whether there is one, or whether there are many subjects, or whether it's about all the subjects. And there are 3 functions of quantitative judgments. That is universal judgments, particular judgments, and singular judgments. What that means, once again, it's always about the subject. That means you're either making a statement about all the subjects, some subjects, or one subject. So a universal judgment would be a judgment like all human beings are mammals, or all human beings are mortal, or all triangles have 3 angles. So in a universal judgment, once again, I take the subject, or rather the group of subjects, and I'm saying that the predicate, like being a mammal, or being mortal, or having 3 angles, it belongs to all the subjects that belong to this particular concept, the concept of the human being, or the concept of a triangle, and there's no exception. So formally, the universal judgment has the structure all subjects are predicate. And we can, when speaking, we can denote that we are making a universal judgment by using a word like all, or no, none, if it's a negative judgment. So those words are of course not necessary. Like I could say all humans are mortal, but I could also say humans are mortal, and then I'm not making it so clear formally that I'm making a universal judgment. But of course, the content at least makes it clear that this is meant to be a universal judgment. Then, secondly, you have particular judgments, and those are judgments that are only true for some subjects, not for all the subjects that belong to a certain concept. So when I say humans are mortal, that of course is a universal judgment. But when I say some humans are philosophers, or some humans are left-handed, some humans are right-handed, some humans live in Europe, some humans live in Asia. Those are particular judgments. They are not true for everything that is within the concept of human being, but just for some of the objects that fall under that concept. We can mark particular judgments in speaking by using words like some, or many, or almost all, or almost none, or a few. So once again, it's not always necessary to use those words. And we can note that in speaking in everyday life, very often we make particular judgments, but we phrase them as if they were universal judgments, right? So someone might say humans have 2 legs, or humans have 10 fingers. And that sounds like a universal judgment, like all humans have this. But of course, it's not universal in the same way as saying that humans are mammals or humans are mortal. It is only a particular judgment, because some humans might have lost a leg or might have lost some fingers. And so this may be true for most humans, but not for all humans. And of course, in everyday language, it's fine to talk like this, especially if people know what you are meaning. But in science and philosophy, it might be a good thing to be a bit more precise. And we should be mindful, including in everyday life, to distinguish universal and particular judgments. Even if we don't distinguish them in speaking, we should do so in thinking, because often you can find that people really do think they are making a universal judgment when their judgment is just particular, because they don't reflect enough about the fact that there might be exceptions to the statement they are making. But anyways, the third judgment of quantity is the singular judgment, and that is a judgment that is only about one singular subject. Like when I say Immanuel Kant is a philosopher, I'm not saying some humans are philosophers. That would be a particular judgment. I'm saying this one particular human being is a philosopher. Or when I say some t-shirts are red, that's particular. But when I say my t-shirt that I'm wearing right now is red, then that's a singular judgment. And the logicians in Kant's time, because they already knew about most of the judgments he's talking about. Like Kant is not claiming that he came up with all of these judgments by himself. Rather, the one thing that really is new, that Kant really added, is this table of judgments. So the way they are ordered, saying there are exactly 12, and they can be grouped into 4 groups of 3, and again into 2 classes of 6. That is Kant's contribution. So logicians were already talking about universal judgments, particular judgments, and Kant would argue with them a little, because they would say that universal judgments and singular judgments don't need to be distinguished. They are in the end the same, because logic is purely formal. I point you to my lecture on what is philosophy to Kant, where I talked about this, that he also defines logic as the formal science of the formal laws of thinking. It's not about the material of our thoughts, about their content, it's just about their formal structure. And if you just look at the structure of a judgment, then there's not really a difference whether it's about many, about all objects of a particular class, or about just one object, because in the latter case, you could also say it's about all the objects of a particular class. Just that class happens to just include one object. Like, I could say Immanuel Kant is a philosopher. That would be a singular judgment. But I could also phrase it as a universal judgment by saying all Immanuel Kants are philosophers. It just so happens that there only is one Immanuel Kant. Or I could make the singular judgment that my t-shirt is red. But I could also phrase it as a universal judgment by saying all the t-shirts I'm wearing right now are red. It just so happens that there only is one t-shirt I'm wearing right now, so there's only one red t-shirt, but still the statement that all the t-shirts I have on me are red is still a true statement. Well, Kant answers that this is true, and so for the logicians who really are just concerned with the formal structure of a statement, for them this is fine. They don't really need to distinguish here. But for him it is important to make that distinction, because once again, this whole table of judgments will lead to the table of categories. The judgments, so to say, will be turned into concepts. And there it turns out that universal and singular judgments both lead to different concepts. But anyways, I'm now turning to the judgments of quality. And while the quantitative judgments are about the subject and how many subjects there are, the qualitative judgments, they are about the predicate of the judgment and about whether you say that the predicate belongs or doesn't belong to the subject. So first off, we have affirmative judgments. Those are the judgments that state that a predicate does belong to a subject. Like, for example, Kant is a philosopher, or human beings are mammals, or human beings are mortal, or human beings have two legs. I'm stating that the subject is or has the predicate. Now, secondly, there are negative judgment or negating judgments. Here I am saying that the predicate does not belong to a certain subject. Like when I say that humans are not birds, or humans are not reptiles, humans are not fish, humans don't have 8 legs or whatever. So here I once again have the subject. Quantitatively it may be one subject or many or all of them, and I'm saying that this predicate does not belong to this subject. Kant says that such negative judgments, they don't teach us anything new. I don't learn anything from them. But they are still quite important to him, because they prevent errors. They keep us away from wrong knowledge. So, for example, when I get asked what is the capital of Germany, and I tell you that Bonn is not the capital of Germany, then you have not really learned something positive. Like, you have not really found out what is the capital of Germany. You have not found out much about Bonn either. Like, you don't know if maybe Bonn is the capital of another country, even if it's not the capital of Germany. Uh, but you can prevent an error. If before you, for some reason, thought that Bonn is still the capital of Germany, like it used to be when Germany was divided, then you now know that no, this is not the case. And Kant says that since negative judgments don't teach us anything new, they are not quite so popular, because we have this natural drive to extend our intellect, to get new concepts or to extend our existing concepts. We want to learn something new and not be denied knowledge. So we are always more happy if someone tells us, well, I can tell you how things work, I have the world figured out, than when someone tells us, I don't know either. And still though, or rather, precisely because of that, because we have this drive to extend our knowledge, we can easily go wrong. And so it is important to have negative judgments that rein us in and that limit us and that get us away from errors. And philosophy in particular, Kant says, should mainly be negative, at least theoretical philosophy. I mean, that's how it starts out, right? Famously, Socrates said, I know that I know nothing. Other people, like the sophists, they claim to have certain knowledge, and he didn't oppose that with other alleged knowledge, saying, you are wrong, but I know what is right instead. But rather, he just showed that they are wrong, that they don't have this positive knowledge, while also acknowledging that he didn't have it either. And Kant's whole critical project, his critique of reason, is also basically about that. It's basically that philosophy, dogmatic philosophy before Kant, made a lot of affirmative judgments, trying to prove God, trying to prove the immortality of the soul. And Kant is responding not by offering better proofs for God, or by offering a proof that God doesn't exist, but rather by essentially making the negative judgment that we can't know if God exists or if our soul is immortal. And I also addressed this in my lecture on the conflict of faculties, which I take to be a key to understanding Kant's whole philosophical project. And there I said that according to Kant, amongst other things, the conflict between the philosophical faculty and the three higher faculties of theology, jurisprudence, and medicine arises from the fact that they are more positive in their orientation, or people come to them for positive help. They want to hear from the priest, what do I have to do to get into heaven? How much do I need to pray? They want to hear from the lawyer, what do I have to do to to win my case, and they want to hear from the physician, what do I have to do to get better again? What medicine do I have to take? What drugs do I need? And I said there that according to Kant, the philosopher should not try to also give positive advice in that way. Then he would quickly become a charlatan, but rather he should mainly try to give negative advice, like don't be evil, then you don't have to fear hell. Don't be unjust and take from others what is theirs, then you don't have to fear prison. Don't live unhealthy, then you don't have to fear sickness. Um, and there are areas where it is especially important to not try to make affirmative judgments, but to go by negative judgments. Like in theology, you have as a field of theology, or maybe better to say as a mode of doing theology that exists, well, basically since antiquity, going back to the Neo-Platonic philosophers. um, you have negative theology, and negative theology basically says that we can't make affirmative statements about God. We can't say what God is, because we can't grasp God. We can only say what God isn't. So we can't really say that God is wise. We can only say that God is not foolish. We can't really say that God loves us. We can only say that God doesn't hate us. We cannot really say that God is all knowing. We can only say that he is not ignorant. Because those words, those concepts like wisdom or love or knowledge, they can be applied to finite human beings, but God is too different. He doesn't have a mind or psyche like ours. So in that sense, he doesn't love us, because he certainly doesn't feel the same emotions that a person experiencing love feels. So it is better, negative philosophy would say, to just speak of God negatively, to just deny what God isn't, so to prevent error, to prevent wrong statements about God, but not try and make affirmative judgments about God. Well, and lastly, we have infinite judgments. And those, well, that's a thing Kant tries to establish, and to be quite frank with you, I think he doesn't do such a great job in the Critique of Pure Reason. Like, I find the passage where he explains them to be rather unclear. Like, the first time I read it, I didn't really understand what he meant. And he is more clear in other passages, like in his lectures, but those are texts that most people are never gonna read. If they are gonna read Kant at all, they are gonna read the Critique of Pure Reason, and there the explanation is not so good. So let me give an explanation, because actually I think it's not such a difficult thing. Basically, in affirmative judgments, you affirm a predicate. You are saying that a predicate belongs to a subject, and that predicate itself is also an affirmative predicate, a positive predicate. In negative judgments, you are negating the copula, the is that connects the subject and the predicate. So you are saying that the predicate does not belong to the subject, but the predicate as such is still an affirmative, a positive predicate, right? So when I say humans are not birds, I'm denying the are. They are not. But a bird as such is still something positive. It is a something, not a nothing. And likewise, when I say my t-shirt is not blue because it's red, I am denying the is. I'm saying it is not. But blue as such is a positive quality. Now, in the infinite judgments, you are affirming the copula. You are saying that the subject is something, but the predicate is negated. You are saying that the subject is something, but that something is really not. So, for example, Kant gives the example of saying the soul is immortal. Now, if I said the soul is not mortal, that would be a negative judgment. The not would deny the is. So there's the positive quality of mortality, and I'm saying that this quality, this predicate, does not belong to the subject soul. But if I say the soul is immortal, I'm saying not that the soul is not something, it is not mortal. I'm saying the soul is something, right? The is not denied. I'm not saying the soul is not, I'm saying the soul is immortal. But then that something, what the soul is, that predicate, that is something negative. It is immortality, so not mortality. Kant says that this difference between negative and infinite judgments becomes especially clear if you put it into Latin. Because in Latin, the statement for the negative judgment would be anima non est mortalis. So here the non, the not, is connected with the est, right? With the is. Anima, the soul, non est, is not mortalis, mortal. But the infinite judgment would be anima est non mortalis. So here the is not denied. Anima est, the soul is. But what is it? It is non mortalis. So it is not mortal, it is immortal. So it is the mortality that is negated. It is not the is that is negated. That is the difference between the negative judgments and the infinite judgments. The infinite judgments are basically affirmative, but what they are affirming is not a positive quality, but rather a negative quality. So it is a difference whether you are saying negatively that humans are not birds, or whether you are making the infinite statement, humans are non-birds. Like, that is the kind of being they are. They are a non-bird. Now, you could say that this really doesn't matter so much. Like, what's the point here? It's basically the same. And this is, once again, this is one reason that logicians prior to Kant didn't really distinguish between affirmative judgments and infinite judgments, because, well, formally, and once again, logic is only about the formal side of thinking, not about the content of thinking. Formally, they are the same. In both cases, the copula is not negated, meaning that the predicate is affirmed. It does belong to the subject. Now, in the affirmative judgments, the predicate may be something positive, and in the infinite judgments, it may be something negative. But for the mere formal structure of the judgment, that really doesn't matter. Kant agrees with that, and he says once again that therefore logicians as such don't really need to distinguish between those. Um, but once again, for him, the distinction is important because he will get from the judgments to the concepts, the categories that are derived from those judgments. And here it will turn out that you can get to very different categories from those two different types of judgments. By the way, this also goes to show that there is a connection between the judgments of quantity and of quality. That's exactly why they belong into the same class, the mathematical class, because you can find that in both of these, the first and the third type of judgment is really the same if you just look at the mere formal structure and if you just approach it as a logician. We will see in a minute that in the dynamic class of judgments, that is not the case. Here, the third of both groups is clearly distinguished from the first. But anyways, you could, if you understood my explanation of what an infinite judgment is, you could still ask, why is it called that? What does it have to do with infinity? Why this name? And well, okay, the explanation that Kant gives is you could treat any concept as a sphere. So you could draw a circle to represent a concept. Like when you say human, you could draw a circle and say every object in that circle is a human, and if it's not in that circle, it's not a human being. And so with this, you could also represent judgments. So, for example, when you say all humans are mammals, you could draw a bigger circle representing the mammals, and you could put a smaller circle representing humans inside. And the human circle is completely within the sphere of the mammals, right? It's not partially outside of it. There are no humans that are not mammals but reptiles. But then the human sphere is not completely filling out the mammal sphere. It's not identical with it because, of course, there are also other mammals like dogs and cats and horses and mice and so on. Or when you say, when you make the particular judgment that some humans can swim, then you would draw a circle for human beings and you would draw a circle for things that can swim, and those circles would partially overlap, but not completely, because there are some humans that can't swim, and there are, of course, also other beings that aren't human but still can swim. Now, with this, we can also explain the difference between negative and infinite judgments, because if you have the negative judgment that, for example, humans are not birds, then that would mean that you have the sphere for birds, and you're basically saying, well, other things might belong to that sphere, like pigeons and sparrows and eagles and owls and storks and so on. But humans do not. Humans don't fall within that sphere of birds. But with that purely negative statement, you have not made a statement about where humans do belong, if they don't belong to the sphere of birds. In fact, you have not even said if humans belong anywhere. Like, maybe humans don't exist. Maybe humans are nothing. Maybe that sphere of the birds is all there is. Maybe everything that exists is a bird. And that means if humans are not birds, then okay, they don't exist, they don't belong within that sphere. But you haven't really learned anything about humans. Now, if you make the infinite judgment that humans are non-birds, Kant would say, it's not just that you don't put humans into the sphere of birds, but rather you claim that there's another sphere besides that of the birds, that is the sphere of the non-birds. And you are stating that humans belong in that sphere. So, in that sense, you are making an affirmative judgment. But at the same time, you are not really making any positive, any affirmative statement about that other circle, because you have just defined it as the sphere of the non-birds. There is no positive definition of what a non-bird is. We only know what it isn't. It is not a bird. So we haven't really learned anything about humans except that they are one of the, and here comes the point, of the infinite number of things that are non-birds. Because really, that sphere, of course, contains everything else, everything that is not a bird. And you can also think of it like this. At first, you only have one sphere that is infinite, the sphere of everything, all the things. And this sphere, of course, also includes the birds. And now, if you say humans are non-birds, you have taken the sphere of everything and you have basically excluded the birds from it. You say that the birds belong within their own circle, and everything else that remains belongs to the circle of the non-birds. But Kant says if you take one thing away from infinity, it still remains infinity. And you could take more. You could say humans are not only non-birds, they're also non-reptiles, non-fish, and so on. But still, no matter how much you take away, the other sphere that is not defined except by being the non-sphere, being the opposite to that which you took away, would always remain infinite. So, that is why Kant calls these judgments that. And one more important thing that I want to point out that will become very important when I talk about the table of categories, and that will be helpful to understand that table. One more thing is that Kant says this other sphere you opened up but didn't define in a positive way. So the example, the circle of non-birds, it limits the circle of the birds. As I already said, if you just make the negative judgment humans are not birds, then you haven't really limited the sphere of the birds. You haven't really said if there's anything except birds, or maybe birds are everything there is. But if you make the infinite judgment that humans are in fact something, they are non-birds, even if you haven't defined that something further on except by being something else than a bird, then that unspecific something, that sphere of the non-birds, is limiting the sphere of the birds. You are saying that the birds are not everything there is. They are limited, and they are limited, they are bordered, so to say, by the realm of the non-birds, whatever the non-birds may be. Once again, this will become important when we get to the categories, because that will explain why this infinite judgment leads Kant to get to the category of limitation. Let's now turn to the other class, to the dynamic judgments. While the mathematical judgments, all 6 of them, are about, so to say, the inner makeup of a judgment and about its elements. How many subjects am I talking about? Am I saying that the predicate belongs to the subject or doesn't belong to the subject? The dynamic judgments are about relations of subjects, of judgments. Either the judgment of relation, they are about relations of judgments with each other or with their parts, and the judgments of modality, they are about the relation of the judgments to me, who is judging, who is thinking in that way. Let's start with the judgments of relation. They are categorical, hypothetical, or disjunctive judgments. Categorical judgments, that's one instance of one of many instances where the philosophical language sort of penetrated into everyday language, but without people really understanding it, or without the actual content of those words really also coming out of the academy and into everyday language. Because you sometimes hear people saying something like, I refuse to do that categorically. I categorically refuse. But if you really ask them what they mean, what that's supposed to mean, surely they have a vague grasp of what it means, or else they wouldn't use the word, but they probably would have a hard time of defining it. Well, what it actually means is simply that the predicate belongs to the subject if it's affirmative, or it doesn't belong to the subject if it's negative. But the thing is that there's a simple relation between subject and predicate. So once again, when I say Kant is a philosopher, that is a categorical judgment. Or when I say human beings are mammals, or human beings are not birds, that is categorical. I'm not saying under certain circumstances human beings are not birds. If these or that conditions are met, then human beings are not birds, or then a triangle has 3 angles. But I'm just saying this is how it is, period. And that is a categorical judgment. And already maybe your alarm goes off, because if you ever heard anything about Kant, you probably heard that in his moral philosophy there's this categorical imperative. Well, I will talk about that in detail when I get to Kant's moral philosophy. But here I can already explain that, yes, the categorical imperative belongs here within the architectonic of Kant's system. Because here reason doesn't tell you, if you want to reach this or that goal, then you should do this or that action. That would be the most prudent way to reach your goal. But rather, when it comes to morality, reason just tells us you ought to do this. Not if, not under this or that condition, not in order to, but simply you should do that. It's not you should use a hammer if you want to get a nail into the wall. It is you ought to have regard, you ought to have reverence for other human beings' autonomy and to not hurt their autonomy, period. But again, I will talk about that in more detail when I get there, when I get to Kant's moral philosophy. Now, the second function of the relation of judgments is hypothetical judgments. And here, those are judgments of the form if, then. So if A is the case, then B is the case. So, for example, if a human being is dead, then he won't breathe anymore. Kant says that here you have, like in categorical judgments, you have a relation between the subject and the predicate. And here you have a relation between the reason and what follows from that reason. So actually, this is a relation between two different judgments, two different categorical judgments, because a human being is dead and a human being doesn't breathe. Those are both categorical judgments. They are both affirmative categorical judgments. And the hypothetical judgment just says that, well, these two, they are connected. If the first of them is true, then the second of them must be true. The hypothetical judgment as such makes no statement about whether the first is true, right? So I could also say, if I'm dead, then I'm not breathing. Well, I'm not dead, so I'm still breathing. But still, the hypothetical judgment that if I was dead, I would not breathe anymore is still a correct judgment, because it just judges not categorically about what is, but rather it judges about the relation between different categorical judgments. Just like you could say the categorical judgment judges about the relation of different representations of different concepts. The last judgments of relation are the disjunctive judgments. Those are judgments of the form either or. So, for example, when I say that a human being is either dead or alive, that is a disjunctive judgment. So I will add right away that the disjunction doesn't need to have only two parts. So I can say when I throw a dice, then it will either show 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. So in that case, the disjunction has 6 parts. That doesn't matter. It could have 2 parts, it could have 200 parts. But what I'm saying here is that there are different possibilities, and they cannot be true at the same time. If one is true, the other is not true. So here too, like in the hypothetical judgments, you have a relation between various categorical judgments, Kant says. Because once again, to say a human being is dead or to say a human being is alive, that would both be categorical judgments. And the disjunctive judgment says that those categorical judgments have a certain relationship with each other. But in a hypothetical judgment, their relation is one of subordination. So I'm saying that one of those categorical judgments depends on the other as its cause. And here in the disjunctive judgment, their relation is one of coordination. I'm saying that they are, so to say, standing next to each other, and they are different options, out of which one must be true and the other must be untrue. Kant also says that, and this once again is going to be important when you look at the table of categories and at a category that is derived from this function of judgment. Kant says that we could describe the disjunctive judgment by saying that it is about the whole and the parts. So it is about a concept as a whole and about its parts and their relations, just like the categorical judgment is about the relation of the subject and the predicate, and the hypothetical judgment is about the relation of the reason and that which is dependent on that reason. So the disjunctive judgment is about the whole and its parts. Why the whole and its parts? That's maybe not immediately evident if you just think of it as a judgment of either or. But the point is to Kant that in order to make such a disjunction, in order to put an or between two statements, they must belong to the same higher class, so to say. So once again, think of a concept like the concept of a human being. Think of it as a sphere. Think of it as a circle you can draw. And now, when it comes to the disjunctive judgment, like saying a human being is either dead or alive, what we are saying is that we can separate that general sphere into various parts, in this case, two parts. And they are therefore the parts of the whole. And those parts, that is important, they depend on one another. They determine one another in the sense that if I put something on one side of the divide, then I immediately know that it can't be on the other side. Like if I look at a certain human being, for example, Kant, I realize Kant is dead. Therefore, it's immediately obvious that he's not alive. On the other hand, me, I'm alive, so it's immediately obvious that I'm not dead while speaking here. Of course, for this to work, what is important is to create a correct disjunction. Like you can't just say either or. You really have to exhaust all the options. Like I can't say I am either here in Germany or I'm in Bulgaria, because there are also many more options where I could be, right? And this can often lead to wrong judgments, Kant says. So one example he would give is if you say everything is either hot or cold, then you could say, well, our faculty of cognition is not hot, therefore it must be cold. But of course it's not cold either. It doesn't have a temperature at all. But this is something Kant says you could easily prevent. You could prevent it in two ways, basically. Either you must be careful not to make your disjunctive judgment such a universal statement, like saying everything is either hot or cold, but rather you must immediately narrow it down. You must say everything that has a temperature is either hot or cold, because then you rule out the faculty of cognition, because that's not a thing that has any temperature, neither hot nor cold. Or the second possibility, and the one Kant recommends in logic, you should not try to create a disjunction between two affirmative judgments or between two negative judgments for that matter, but rather between an affirmative judgment and a negative one that is its contradictory opposite. Like if you say everything is either hot or it is not hot, then you can say, well, the faculty of cognition is not hot, therefore it is not hot. And you leave open if it is not hot because it is cold or because it has no temperature at all. Or the other example Kant gives is if you say everything either smells good or it smells bad, it stinks, then this is a wrong disjunctive judgment. It would again lead you to say, well, reason does not smell good, therefore reason smells bad, reason stinks. But if you just say everything either smells good or it smells not good, then you could say, well, reason doesn't smell good, therefore it smells not good. And you have not made the statement whether it smells not good because it's stinking or because it just doesn't have any smell at all. Also, what I would point out is that in everyday life, we often make incomplete disjunctive judgments. Like someone may say, I could go eat Italian food today, or I could go eat Chinese food today. Now, if you think about that, that's obviously not all he could do. He could get Mexican food, he could get Japanese food, or Indian food, or Arabic food. Or he could stay at home and cook for himself, or he could eat nothing at all and go hungry. But if you told the person that, like especially if you say, oh, you also have the option of going hungry, the person will probably say, well, yeah, okay, in theory, hypothetically, I do have that option, but I don't want to do that. So the thing is that often when making a disjunctive statement, we leave out certain options because we have already ruled them out. They may be options in theory. They would belong into this disjunctive judgment if you wanted to be logically thorough. But we have already ruled them out. I don't want to go hungry, and I'm not in the mood to have Indian food or Japanese food. I already narrowed it down to Italian or Chinese. I'm really only discussing these two options now. That is, of course, okay. Like in many disjunctive judgments, the options are so many, there's no reason to list them all down. And of course, when talking like that in everyday life, then this is a perfectly fine thing to do. But we should be mindful of this and we should reflect about this. Often we narrow things down to very few options, or maybe only two, or maybe only one option, because we unconsciously already ruled out certain options. And if we don't reflect on that enough, we may really take away freedom from ourselves, because we stop thinking about certain options that would be real options that maybe are worth considering. Like, for example, you can see that in politics. Someone may say, oh, I could vote for party A or party B, but what should I do? They are both shit, but I guess I have to take the lesser evil or whatever. But in fact, this is not the only two options you have. You already unconsciously, maybe not reflecting about it, but you already unnecessarily narrowed things down. Like, you also have the option to vote third party, to vote for a small party that has maybe a lesser chance of winning, but you couldn't still vote for them. And of course, you also have the option to not vote at all. And by sort of denying that, not reflecting about it, you are taking away your own freedom, because maybe you would find that a third party really is the better option for you, that you really feel more represented by them. But anyways, those are the judgments of relation. So let's now turn to the last title, that is modality. And these three judgments are special in a way because, as I already said, they are also about the relation, but not the relation of the parts of the judgment or of various judgments to one another, but rather they are about the relation of the judgment and the judging subject. So here by subject, I don't mean the subject of the judgment, the subject the judgment is about, like Kant in the judgment, Kant is a philosopher, but I mean the subject, the thinking subject who really makes this judgment, like me, myself. And the three judgments of modality, they are about the level of certainty that you have when making that judgment. And that means that unlike the other 9 types of judgment, you cannot so clearly distinguish them merely by their formal structure. Like if I say all subjects are that predicate, that is a universal judgment, and it is different in structure from a particular judgment that says some subjects are that predicate. Or if I say the subject is this predicate, affirmative judgment, or this subject is not that predicate, negative judgment, that is clearly a formally different judgment. But here, when it comes to modality, it is not so much the formal structure that shows me the difference between the judgments, but it is the level of degree of certainty. So one and the same judgment, formally and in terms of content, could really belong to all 3 types of judgments of modality. So, for example, when I say that 7 times 8 is 56, then it's an apodictic judgment because I'm really certain of this. But when the teacher asks an elementary school kid in, I don't know, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, who hasn't really learned multiplying that well yet, and that kid thinks a while and then says, 7 times 8, is it 56 maybe? Then the judgment in terms of its content, saying 7 times 8 is 56, is the same, but for me it's apodictic because I'm sure of myself. For that kid, it's a problematic judgment because the kid is uncertain. So what are the 3 types of judgments of modality? Well, first off, you have what I already named a second ago. You have the problematic judgments. Now, problematic is a word that has been misused and abused recently in public discourse. Now all kinds of things or people even are problematic. But actually, if you go back to the Greek, problema means something that is put before you, like something that blocks your way, or a task that you have to solve. So really what a problematic judgment means is that you don't know for sure. You can show that something is a problematic judgment by using words such as maybe or probably or likely this is the case, but you are just not sure that it really is the case. Second, you have assertive judgments. And these are judgments that state that something is the case. Like here you are sure that it is the case. You are asserting that this is. But you are not sure that it must be the case. You are simply stating this is how it is. These are the facts. But maybe it also could be otherwise. Which leads to the last judgment of modality, and that is the apodictic judgment. This is when you are absolutely certain, not just that something is the case, but rather that something must be the case, and it can't be otherwise. And of course, such apodictic judgments can only come from reason. So they must be judgments a priori, while all judgments from experience, that is, all judgments a posteriori, can only be assertive judgments. They can only state that experience tells us this and that happens to be the case. But only reason can tell us that something must be the case and cannot possibly be otherwise. By the way, this might also help if you go back to my lecture on what is science to Kant. I talked about Kant distinguishing between different kinds of science, and these judgments of modality might help in understanding that better. Because I said that, okay, to Kant, all science is about systematic knowledge and not just an aggregate of cognitions, but systematic cognitions. But then I said Kant distinguishes between what he calls historical scholarship, what could be called being aware of something, on the other hand, rational science, what could be called really knowing something. And maybe now this can get more clear for you, because you could say that in historical scholarship, you have systematic cognitions, or else it would be not scientific at all. But those cognitions that you are bringing into a system, they are really just assertive. Like whether it's the historian asserting that something did happen in the past, or whether it's the astronomer asserting that there are so and so many stars here in the sky, or whether it's the biologist asserting that in this forest there are these and that species of bugs, and this is the food they eat, and this is their process and their habits of reproduction. All of this is just historical scholarship to Kant, because through experience you are asserting that things are the case, but you have no insight into them having to be the case. Now, rational science, which is, well, actual science, has cognition not just of individual facts, but of laws from which the facts can be deduced. Like the physicist who says that if you throw a stone, it will fall back to Earth because of the law of gravity. That physicist doesn't just have historical scholarship that this stone happened to fall down. He doesn't just assert that this is what happened after he saw it, but rather he can predict it happening because he knows there is a law, and from that law it follows with apodictic certainty that it can't be any other way. The stone cannot possibly not fall down as long as gravity is in place. And of course, I also said that this rational science in turn is separated into two kinds of rational science by Kant. There is pure science, which is science in the actual sense to him, and then there is applied or empirical science. And you could say that in pure science, it is not just the individual case, the individual fact, which is apodictically certain because you deduced it from a law, but rather it is that law itself which you can state with apodictic certainty. Like a mathematician can be absolutely certain of the theorem of Pythagoras. He can be absolutely certain that in a right triangle, the squares you can draw on the two shorter sides, they together are as big as the square you can draw on the longer side. On the other hand, in applied in empirical science, the specific case, the specific fact that we know with apodictic certainty because of a general law, but that this law is in place, that itself is not apodictically certain, but is something we just assert. Like if the physicist tells you that since since metal is a heat conductor, if you heat a rod of iron on one end and then you touch the other hand, you will burn yourself. Now, this individual fact, when I heat one end of the iron rod and then touch the other end, I will burn myself. Since there is this general law that metals conduct heat, that individual fact is certain. We can make an apodictic judgment about this. But saying that metals conduct heat, that in itself cannot be judged with apodictic certainty, because we don't see that nature must function according to this law. We just find that it does function according to this law, so we assert this law. You could also describe the difference between pure and applied science according to the judgments of relation. And you could say that in the empirical science, you are making hypothetical statements. So if metal is a heat conductor, then if I heat one end of the iron rod, I will burn myself when touching the other hand. If there is gravity in place, then a stone I throw will fall down again. And so, since this is a correct hypothetical judgment, when the first part of it is correct, I can have apodictic certainty that the second part is correct too. But that the first part is correct, that there is gravity, that metal is a heat conductor, that may only be asserted and not be stated with apodictic certainty. While you could say that in pure science, the laws are not just hypothetical, but rather you are making categorical judgments. You are saying that categorically all triangles, all right triangles follow the Pythagorean theorem, or categorically all squares can be divided into two equal triangles. But anyway, so these are the three judgments of modality. I will point out once more that one and the same statement in content, the same, can have a different modality depending on who makes it. So if we look at another galaxy, we can say maybe there's life in that galaxy somewhere. So for us, that is a problematic statement. Now, let's say there really is intelligent life somewhere in that galaxy. Then those aliens will say there is life in our galaxy, and out of their mouth, this will be an assertive statement. And if they look at our galaxy, they can make the problematic judgment that there might be life in our galaxy. We, on the other hand, we know for sure. We can assert that there is life in our galaxy. So really, one and the same statement, there is life, there is intelligent life here in this galaxy. One and the same statement can be an assertion, or it can just be problematic, depending on who makes it. And of course, it could also, in theory, be apodictic. Like, of course, all empirical judgments as such can only be assertions. They cannot be apodictic for us. But it could be that it's not just the case that there is life here on Earth, but rather that it is necessary for life existing here on Earth. Now, we don't have any insight into it being necessary, but it could be that if we had insight into God, like if we could know first off that there is a God with certainty, and second, if we could, so to say, peek into his divine mind and see and understand his divine plan for the world, we could maybe find that within that plan it was necessary for some reason for life to exist here on planet Earth of all places. So then we could turn this into an apodictic judgment. So really it depends on who makes the judgment. It is always about the relation to the judging subject. And I will also mention that one issue is that people don't reflect enough most of the time about which modality their judgments have or should have. Very often you find people making what should be a problematic judgment, but phrasing it or even believing as if it was assertive or even apodictic. Like it could be something simple like saying, oh, I know I put my car keys here on that table. I mean, you should say, I think I put them onto the table. Maybe I put them on this table. It's a problematic judgment. It's not something you can just assert. I mean, if you knew you put them on the table, then they would have to be on the table, right? Unless someone took them away. But also it could be something more extreme, more fundamental, like someone saying, everyone who doesn't share my faith, everyone who's not part of my church, my sect, will go to hell. Now, this, if at all, should only be a problematic judgment. Maybe everyone who believes something different will go to hell. Maybe I will go to hell because I was in the wrong church. But it is treated as if that person had apodictic certainty, which he certainly does not, and that I am apodictically certain about. Here, this gets into the topic of conscientiousness, because that is what having conscience is really about, according to Kant. You should reflect on how certain you are of yourself, of what you're doing, of that what you're doing is right. Are you only making a problematic judgment or an assertive or even an apodictic judgment? And Kant would say that you can always know this through the simple trick of a bet. Would you be willing to bet that you put your keys on that table? And how much would you bet? Would you be willing to bet $10? Would you be willing to bet $100, $1,000, $1 billion? Would you bet your life on it? Or the highest possible stakes, would you bet your eternal felicity on it? Would you bet going to hell for it? And with that, you can quickly find out how sure you really are of something. But this is something I will talk more about when I get into Kant's moral philosophy. So this, according to Kant, are the 12 functions of judgments we have in our thinking. I will stress that every judgment must be determined according to all 4 titles of judgment. So it's not possible to, let's say, make a judgment that has a certain quantity but no quality. It needs to have both, and also relation and modality at the same time. So, for example, the judgment Kant is a philosopher is, according to its quantity, a singular judgment. I'm judging about one subject, just about Kant. But according to its quality, it's an affirmative judgment. I'm saying Kant is something, he is a philosopher. According to its relation, it's a categorical judgment. I'm saying, yes, Kant is a philosopher, period. Not under certain conditions, not he is maybe a philosopher or possibly something else, but rather he is a philosopher. And according to its modality, it is an assertive judgment. It's not just problematic. I'm not saying maybe he's a philosopher, but it's not apodictic either. I'm not saying he has to be a philosopher. This was necessary. He couldn't be something else. If his life had taken another turn, then maybe he would have been something else. So the judgment must always be considered according to all 4 titles of judgments. But then this is, Kant says, this table of judgments, this is exhaustive. This is all the judgments we can make. And you can try for yourself. You will, I would say, you will find that you have to agree with Kant. Like, you can try, is there another quantity of judgment than universal, particular, or singular? Can I possibly make a judgment that is not about all the subjects or some subject or some subjects or just one subject? Or according to quality, can I possibly make a judgment that isn't about saying this subject has that quality, or it doesn't have that quality, or it has that non-quality? Now, what is important, of course, so there are no confusions here, is that this is only true for judgments. Not everything we say is a judgment. Like, you can also make an imperative. Like, if you ask someone, could you please close the window? That is not a judgment. Or you can ask a question like, what time is it? That's also not a judgment. So, of course, even those, while not being judgments, they depend on judgments. If you ask someone, could you please close the window? You probably made the judgment that there is a window, that the window is open, that the window can possibly be closed, that this person has the ability to close the window. So in everyday life, we are constantly making judgments, even if it happens unconsciously, even if we are not really reflecting on every single judgment. So even an imperative or a question depends on judgments, but they themselves are not judgments. But if you look at judgments only, at all statements about something being or not being the case, then you will find that they follow the table of judgments. Kant would say, just like it is not possible for us to view anything except in time and space, since those simply are our two forms of viewing, it is not possible for us to think anything except in those 12 forms of judgment, because those simply are the functions of our intellect. This is how our intellect connects representations. Now, that is just how we are as human beings. Why we are that way, why we have those two forms of viewing and those 12 functions of judgment, that's not something that Kant goes into. In fact, he believed that it couldn't possibly be answered. It's just how we happen to be, and maybe other beings are different, but we are this way. That didn't really satisfy the generation of philosophers that came after Kant. So you will find that Fichte went deeper into this and explained where these 12 functions of judgments come from. But when it comes to Kant, he would say, well, this is just how we as human beings work. But it is how we work. We cannot possibly view anything except in time and space. That is how our sensuality works. And we cannot possibly think of anything except in these 12 manners of judgment. That is how our thinking works. And we can't possibly get out of that. Within these forms, we can do all manner of things. Like, of course, we also have a fantasy. I can imagine things in time and space that I have never seen, and just like that, I can make new judgments. I can make the judgment all unicorns have a horn on their head. It's a judgment about beings that don't actually exist, but still it is a universal judgment if I say all unicorns. Still, it is an affirmative judgment if I say they have a horn. Still, it is a categorical judgment if I say this is how it is. This predicate belongs to this subject. I can't get out of that. Those are the only types of judgment I can make. All my thinking has to go along those lines. Just to avoid another confusion, you may say, wait a minute, aren't there also other types of judgment? Doesn't Kant himself in other instances talk about other types of judgment? Like, doesn't he talk about judgments a priori and a posteriori, and about synthetic and analytic judgments, and about determining and preliminary judgments? Yes. But this table of judgments is only about the logical function of judgments. So about the form of judgments. Once again, judgments connect representations, and these are the 12 forms in which they can connect representations. So they can, for example, connect the representation of a predicate with all the representations of a subject or with some of them. They can connect representation of a predicate with the subject, or they can disconnect them in a negative judgment. Other types of judgments, other categorizations of judgments are not about their form. They are maybe about the source of judgments or about their content, but they are not about their form. So, for example, when you say God is good, God is holy, or God is all-knowing. And on the other hand, when you say a human has 2 legs, then the first is a judgment a priori. I don't know that God is like this from experience, but rather I know from thinking about it from pure reason that this is how I have to think God, because otherwise he simply would not be God. And on the other hand, saying that humans have two legs, this is a judgment a posteriori, because this is not something reason tells me. Then it would be apodictic, then it would have to necessarily be that way. But I don't see why it has to, why humans couldn't also have four legs, for example. But still, this saying one judgment's a priori, the other is a judgment a posteriori, this is just about their source, about saying I got this judgment through reason and this through experience. But if you just look at them formally, at their logical structure, then saying God is almighty and saying a human being has two legs really has the same structure. Both are affirmative judgments. Both say this quality, being almighty, having two legs, belongs to this subject, to God, to the human being. Both are categorical, saying, yes, this predicate belongs to this subject, not under certain conditions, but categorically. And likewise, the distinction between synthetic and analytic judgments, well, of course, the first one is analytic. I'm analyzing the concept of God, and I'm finding that it includes the concept of holiness, almightiness, being all-knowing. And in the other instance, it's synthetic. I'm synthesizing the concept of a human with the concept of two legs. But that is just how I make that judgment. That is about the material side of that judgment. But just in their formal structure, they are not affected by that. I could make a synthetic judgment a priori, like all triangles have 180 degrees, and I could make a synthetic judgment a posteriori, like all humans are mammals, and they are both formally the same. They just have a different source, being a priori or a posteriori. So again, the table of judgments is exhaustive, but only insofar as classifying judgments according to their form, according to the logical function, according to the way in which the intellect happens to connect certain representations. Before closing this off, I also want to point out that Kant, from the table of judgments, also deduces the basic principles, or explains the basic principles of logic. Those principles had been known to logicians for a long time, often since antiquity, and Kant can put them on their respective architectonic place in the table of judgments, according to both the judgments of relation and of modality, because they belong to the same class, the dynamic class, so they are connected. And Kant would say there are three basic principles of logic. First, you have the principle of contradiction, saying that something cannot be A and non-A. So my t-shirt cannot be red and at the same time not red, like blue or green. Or I cannot be alive while also being dead. And you also have the law of identity that says that A is A. So my red t-shirt is red. I'm alive, so I'm alive. So a thing is identical with itself. These are usually treated as different logical principles, But to Kant, it's really just one and the same principle turned on its head. So saying that a thing is identical with itself, or that it cannot contradict itself, that's really saying the same thing to Kant. So this first logical principle, according to him, is derived from the categorical judgments, because here I'm saying that a subject has this predicate. So really I'm saying that they are identical in a way, or I'm saying that it would be a contradiction if the subject had the opposing predicate. So when I say, for example, a circle is round, then being a circle and roundness are in a way identical things, while the opposite, saying a circle has angles, would be contradicting. They are not identical. And also, Kant says that this logical principle is the principle of the problematic judgments. Because a problematic judgment says that something could be the case, something is possible. Well, what is the criterion of possibility? How do I know that something is possible and not impossible? Well, by the fact it doesn't contradict itself. So I can say that a circle with angles, or a four-angled triangle, that is an impossible thing, because it violates the principle of contradiction. The predicate contradicts the subject. On the other hand, I can say that a unicorn could be a possible thing, or that it is possible for life to exist somewhere out there on another planet, because I can't find any contradiction in that. But what is important to Kant, what he does stress, is that this principle of contradiction belongs to the problematic judgments, not to assertive or apodictic judgments. That's important because, and I talked about this already in my lecture on dogmatism, skepticism, criticism. That's important because the dogmatic philosophy before Kant in 18th century Germany had often tried to find new truths, to assert new truths, to expand its cognition through the principle of contradiction, saying that they could prove God, or they could prove the immortality of the soul, that their concepts of God or of the immortality of the soul don't contradict themselves. And Kant says, well, yeah, that may be, but that allows us only at best to say this is possible, but it certainly doesn't allow us to say that this is the case. Like, okay, it doesn't contradict when I say my soul will live on and go to heaven or hell, but it also doesn't self-contradict when I say my soul will be reincarnated, or my soul will vanish and not live on. All of this conforms to the principle of contradiction. Therefore, it might be possible. It allows to make a problematic statement, but nothing more. Now, a second logical principle is what Kant calls the principle of reason, or rather, it's the principle of sufficient reason. What it says is that everything that is the case requires a sufficient reason for being the case. And only if that reason itself is the case, then that thing which depends on it is also the case. That is obviously the principle belonging to the hypothetical judgments, because that's exactly the type of judgment they are, right? They say if A than B. So A is the sufficient reason for B. If I know A to be true, then I don't need to ask further. I know immediately that B also must be true. But B can't be true without A. And this principle of sufficient reason, this Kant says is also the principle of assertive judgments. Because when I assert that something is the case, I need a sufficient reason for making that assertion. A reason that tells me that this thing is the case. Either some argument, some premise from which I can conclude it, or maybe I've just seen it in the world and therefore know it to be true. But I need some reason to state that something is true. And lastly, we have what Kant calls the principle of division. That is the principle of the exclusion of the third or of the middle between two contradicting opposites. That logical principle basically says that either A or non-A must be the case. And there can't be a third. Like if you tell me, oh, it could also be B, well, B is either identical with A, it's either another name for A, or B is not A. Then that means that A is not the case, non-A is the case. Now, non-A could include B and C and D and so on, but still all of them are non-A. So it's either A or non-A. So for example, I as a human being am either alive or I am dead. I can't be anything else. If you tell me, oh, you could also be barely alive, you could be very sick and dying, okay, fine, but then I'm still alive. Or if you tell me, oh, but you could be completely burned, so nothing's left of your body, well, doesn't matter if there's a corpse left or if I'm burned to a crisp. In either case, I am dead. I'm either dead or alive. Now, this obviously is the principle of the disjunctive judgments. It's about saying either or. And Kant says that this same principle is also the principle of the apodictic judgments. Because every apodictic judgment can really be understood as following from a disjunctive judgment where you divide a concept into two possibilities and deny one possibility, and therefore you are apodictically certain that the other possibility must be the case. So when you say I am apodictically certain that every triangle has three angles, not more or less, you could describe it in the disjunctive judgment. Every triangle either has three angles or it doesn't have three angles. It has more than three angles or less than three angles. Well, the second possibility is not true. It doesn't not have three angles. Therefore, we have apodictic certainty that the first possibility is true, that a triangle really does have three angles. That is what necessity means to Kant. The exclusion of the contradictory opposite, saying the opposite contradicting this is impossible, is the same as saying this thing is necessary. It's not just possible or just the case, it is necessarily the case. Once again, these logical principles have existed in logic and been known in logic before and since. And they are considered very, very basic logical principles, precisely because every regular human being would agree with them and would immediately understand them to be true. Like it just seems evident that everything cannot contradict itself and must be identical with itself, or that everything that is the case must be the case for a reason. or that everything that is not A must therefore be non-A. These logical principles are rarely ever questioned. But you could ask the question, where do they come from? How do we get them? How do we know so certainly that they are true? And one discussion that people have to this day about them is, are they laws of our thinking? Like, is this maybe how our brain developed through evolution and now we have to think this way? Or rather, are they sort of laws of nature? So is it that the things outside of us have to conform to these logical principles, or is it just that we have to think in these principles? And of course, the answer Kant has to that is that on the one hand, they are not like divine laws that somehow are out there and somehow we recognize, but rather they are the laws of our thinking. In that way, they are subjective. We must think that way. That's not necessarily saying that everyone must think that way or that the things in themselves must be that way. It's not saying, for example, that God is thinking in these logical principles. But we must think that way because we must think in the table of judgments. These are the 12 ways we have of judging, of making connections between representations. And from these 12 ways, or rather from not from all 12 of them, but from the dynamic ways of judging, those logical principles do follow. But they are not merely subjective, they are also objective, in the way that all the objects of our thinking must indeed conform to them. And here we get to Kant's transcendental idealism again, about which I talked in a previous lecture already. Because what Kant would say is that, okay, I don't know how the things in themselves are made up. I can only think according to these logical principles. So if I try to think of the things in themselves, if I try to think of God, for example, I also have to think according to these logical principles. So I have to think, for example, of God as not contradicting himself. But that doesn't really tell me anything about the true nature of the things in themselves. That's just sort of my limitation. I can't help but thinking according to these logical principles. But when it comes to the things I experience, when it comes to the things that appear to me, I know that I don't just apply these logical principles to them, maybe without being justified in doing so, but rather I do know with apodictic certainty that they follow these logical principles, that they cannot contradict themselves, that they must have a reason, that they, if they are A, cannot be non-A. Why do I know that? Because precisely they are not things in themselves. They are things that appear to me. They are not objects existing somehow outside of me. They are the objects of my consciousness. They are my representations. And therefore, they must follow my, so to say, rules of representing things, of being conscious of things. Because if they didn't, I couldn't be conscious of them. If they didn't, they couldn't appear to me. So in that way, yes, the logical principles are laws of nature, in a way, Kant would say, but not in the sense of a nature existing outside of us under these laws, but rather in the sense that nature as a whole is not something existing outside of us, but nature is something that we are conscious of. Nature is something that appears to us and therefore must appear to us under the laws given to it by our thinking. So that was the table of judgments. And as I said, from this, the table of categories is deduced. And certainly in Kant's philosophy and for the architectonic of his system, it's the categories that matter most. And I will talk about those in the very next lecture. But I find it important to first talk about the judgments because, after all, the categories are based on those judgments. And I find that many misunderstandings people have when it comes to certain of the categories, including scholars, including experts, including myself previously to really diving deeper into Kant. A lot of these misunderstandings come from trying to understand the categories by themselves on their own terms, maybe by the names Kant gave to them. But if rather you understand the categories as derived from these 12 judgments, and you have understood these 12 functions of judgments, then you will have a much easier time understanding the categories. And that is exactly what I want to help you to do in the next lecture, where I will explain all 12 of the categories, so the basic elements of all our thinking, the 12 pure intellectual concepts that we think in. I will explain them in more detail, just like I explained the judgments in detail here in this lecture. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Christos Pai, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, as well as to all others who support me and my Aufklären course.